My name is Alara, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my adult life, I have been the silent root system of my family, the unseen foundation holding everything upright while the more visible branches, my mother and my younger sister, basked in the sun. Our home is a charming old house in Port Blossom, a coastal city known for its salt-laced air and the stubborn lilacs that bloom each spring, their fragrance a sweet, pervasive ghost. It was my father's house. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left it to us, along with a quiet trust in me to manage our affairs. He knew I was the practical one. What he might not have known was that his savings, meant to be a cushion, would become a thin blanket I stretched to cover a chasm of my family's making. My sister, Celine, is 2 years my junior, a whirlwind of charisma and artistic aspirations who has never quite touched the ground. My mother, Marion, orbits her love a fierce and blinding sun that has always cast me in shadow. While I built a career as a landscape designer, meticulously drafting plans for parks and private gardens, they lived a life of graceful leisure. They never questioned how the property taxes were paid, how the pantry remained full, or how Celine's art school tuition, with its endless list of expensive supplies, was always settled on time. The money simply appeared, a quiet magic they chose not to investigate. I was the magician, and the trick was costing me my youth. This story, my story, is not one of vengeance, but of reclamation. It is about the winter that finally came for the endless summer in our home and the quiet strength I found in the cold. It begins, as so many of our family's tipping points did, with Celine wanting something. The day it all began to unravel was a Saturday in late May. A soft, pearlescent fog had rolled in from the harbor, draping the city in a gentle quiet. I was sitting at our heavy oak dining table, a relic from my grandparents, nursing a mug of black coffee and sketching a preliminary design for a public rose garden. The scent of damp earth and distant salt drifted through the open window, a smell I had always found comforting. It was the smell of home, of permanence. Celine drifted into the room, not with the clatter of a normal person, but with a dancer's practiced grace. She was wearing a silk robe the color of a sunrise, her blonde hair piled loosely on her head. She smiled, a dazzling, effortless thing that had opened countless doors for her. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the preemptive brace for impact. "Alara," she began, her voice a soft, melodious hum. She poured herself a glass of orange juice, leaning against the counter as if posing for an invisible camera. "I have the most incredible idea." I kept my eyes on my paper, shading in the cross-hatching for a stone path. "Oh! You know that influencer, Aesthetically Amelia?" I didn't, but I nodded. "Well, she's hosting a curated creative retreat in wine country. It's for a very small, exclusive group. 3 days of workshops, gourmet meals, a private chateau. It's a networking opportunity, really. Life-changing." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I knew what was coming. It was always wrapped in the language of opportunity, of art, of once-in-a-lifetime chances. "It sounds lovely, Celine." "It is," she breathed, her eyes shining. "And there's one spot left. I have to have it." She paused, taking a delicate sip of her juice. "I just need a little help with the fee. It's $8,500. The pencil in my hand stopped moving. I looked up from my drawing, the intricate lines of the rose garden suddenly seeming foolish and small. The fog outside felt like it had seeped into the room, thick and suffocating. $8,500? I repeated the words slowly, letting their weight settle between us. "For a 3-day trip?" "It's not a trip, Alara. It's an investment in my future," she said, her smile tightening just a fraction. "The people I'll meet, the connections I'll make." "You can't put a price on that." "Apparently you can," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "And it's $8,500. Celine, that's an astronomical amount of money." The warmth in her expression vanished, replaced by a familiar, petulant chill. "It's not for you. You have your stable job, your boring little life. You don't understand the art world. You have to spend money to make money. I understand the value of money because I'm the one who earns it, I said, my own voice firming. I kept it level, a skill I'd honed over years of her emotional tempests. I pay for your tuition, Celine. I pay for this house. I cannot give you that much money for a weekend getaway. Her face, usually so beautifully composed, twisted with disdain. Selfish. You're always so selfish. You hoard your money and hide away in your room with your boring drawings. You're my sister. You're supposed to want me to succeed. I do want you to succeed, I said, and it was true, though the hope was growing fainter by the year. I've supported your dream for 5 years. I've paid for every class, every canvas, every expensive tube of paint. But this is not a need. It's a luxury, and it's one we can't afford. Just then, our mother, Marion, walked in, drawn by the rising tension. She wore her usual uniform of elegant loungewear, a cashmere cardigan draped over her shoulders. She immediately assessed the scene and, as always, moved to stand with Celine. "Elara, what's this about?" she asked, her tone already laced with disapproval. "Elara is refusing to help me," Celine said, her voice catching with theatrical hurt. "She doesn't want me to go on the retreat." My mother turned her disappointed gaze on me. "Honey, she works so hard on her art. She deserves a little break, a chance to be with her peers." "It's just a bit of money." "It's over $8,000, Mom," I said, looking between the two of them. They were a united front, a fortress of entitlement I had spent years trying to breach with reason and patience. "It's not a bit of money, Dot." "Oh, Elara, don't be so dramatic," my mother sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "Your father left us provided for. You act as though every penny comes from your own pocket." And there it was. The fundamental, willful ignorance I had enabled for so long. They genuinely believed in a magical, endless well of my father's money, a well that had, in reality, run dry 36 months ago. I had let them believe it because the truth was too difficult, because I wanted to protect them, because I didn't want to fight. I looked at my drawing of the rose garden, a place of order and beauty. My life was anything but. In that moment, something inside me, a support beam I hadn't known was cracking, finally gave way. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, my chest. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "No," I said, the word clear and solid in the quiet room. "The answer is no. I will not be paying for it." Celine's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. She slammed her glass down on the counter, orange juice sloshing over the side. "Fine. Be a miserable, jealous shrew. But you'll regret this." She stormed out of the kitchen, my mother following her, casting one last look of profound disappointment over her shoulder at me. I was left alone with the scent of spilled juice and the cold, terrifying and exhilarating finality of my decision. I didn't know then that Celine's promise of regret would be delivered not in words, but in fire and ash. The house grew quiet in the days that followed. It was a heavy, charged silence, thick with unspoken resentment. Celine and my mother moved around me like I was a ghost, their conversations ceasing the moment I entered a room. I retreated into my work, spending long hours at the firm and then longer hours at home, hunched over my drafting table in my bedroom. My room was my sanctuary, the one space in the house that felt entirely mine. It overlooked the backyard, where I'd planted a small, perfect garden of my own, hydrangeas, climbing jasmine, and a single, resilient wisteria vine. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but my most prized possession was a beautiful, freestanding mahogany wardrobe. Inside, it held a collection of clothing I had curated over years of careful saving. They weren't just dresses, they were markers of my life, of my own quiet achievements. There was a deep blue vintage silk dress I'd bought with the bonus from my first major project. A tailored wool coat, the color of cream, that I'd splurged on after a promotion. A floral linen sundress that I'd worn on a rare, perfect summer day trip I'd taken by myself up the coast. Each piece was a story, a testament to the fact that my life, however boring Celine found it, was my own. They were worth a significant amount of money, but their sentimental value was immeasurable. They were my armor. One evening, I was held up at the office. We were on a tight deadline for a new municipal park proposal, and I lost track of time, absorbed in the meticulous details of planting schedules and irrigation systems. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I finally pulled my car into our driveway. The house was dark except for a faint, flickering glow coming from the backyard. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I smelled it before I saw it, a harsh, chemical smell of burning fabric, acrid and sickening. It clung to the damp night air. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I dropped my bag in the entryway and ran through the house to the back door. There, in the center of my carefully tended lawn, was a large, blackened circle. A small, smoldering bonfire was dying in the middle of it, sending up thin tendrils of gray smoke. And in the pile of ashes, I could see the unmistakable, heartbreaking remnants of my life. The glint of a silver button from my wool coat, a scorched patch of blue silk, a charred fragment of a floral pattern. Standing a few feet away, illuminated by the dim light from the kitchen window, was Celine. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of defiant satisfaction. "I told you that you would regret it," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Since you're so worried about money, I thought I'd help you downsize. You don't need all these fancy things anyway." I stared at the pyre of my possessions, at the ashes of my memories. A wave of nausea washed over me, so profound it made my knees weak. I couldn't speak. The air was stolen from my lungs. The pain was not just about the clothes, the money, the sheer, vicious waste. It was the absolute cruelty of it. The violation. She hadn't just burned my things, she had tried to burn a part of me. My mother appeared in the doorway behind her, a silhouette against the light. She looked at the smoldering pile, then at me. Her expression wasn't one of horror or anger at Celine. It was one of weary annoyance. "Alara, honestly," she said, her voice sighing. "It's just clothes. Don't make such a scene. It's just clothes." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. In that instant, whatever lingering, hopeful part of me that still loved them, that still made excuses for them, withered and died. It was a quiet, painless death, a final surrender. I looked from my sister's smug face to my mother's indifferent one, and I felt nothing. The rage, the grief, the shock, it all receded, replaced by a vast, empty calm. The fog had finally lifted, and the landscape it revealed was desolate, but it was clear. I turned without a word and walked back into the house, past my mother and up the stairs to my room. I closed the door, walked over to my now empty wardrobe, and ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood. The smell of smoke was already in the room. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on my bed in the silent, empty dark, and I made a plan. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had no idea that all they had done was give me the one thing I needed most, a reason to stop holding them up. They were about to learn the true cost of their comfort, and I would be the one to hand them the bill. The next morning, I awoke not with grief, but with a crystalline sense of purpose. The sun streamed through my window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, resolute world of its own. I felt like that, small, perhaps, but finally in my own orbit. For years, my father's meticulous nature, a trait I had inherited, had compelled me to keep perfect records. It started as a way to honor his trust, to ensure I was being a responsible steward of the family finances. It evolved into a defense mechanism, a quiet accumulation of proof for a trial I never thought I'd have to conduct. In the bottom of my desk drawer, beneath old sketches and rolls of drafting paper, was a locked metal file box. I opened it. Inside were 5 thick, neatly labeled binders. Household utilities. Property and taxes. Marion, personal. Celine, education. Celine, personal. I spent the entire day in my room, the door closed. I spread the contents of the binders across my floor. It was a paper trail of my servitude. Every electricity bill, paid from my personal checking account. Every property tax receipt, bearing my signature. Canceled checks for the new roof we'd needed 2 winters ago. A 5-year ledger of grocery store receipts, a small mountain of mundane, life-sustaining expenses. The most damning binder was Celine, Education. It contained every tuition invoice from the Port Blossom College of Art and Design, each one marked paid in full, via direct transfer from my savings account. There were statements for her art supplies, her textbooks, her campus fees. I even had the signed loan agreement for her car, a loan I had co-signed and for which I had been making every single payment. My mother's belief that my father's inheritance was funding their lives was the most painful fiction. I pulled out the bank statements from the estate account. They showed the initial sum, followed by a steady, methodical depletion, until the balance hit zero just over 3 years ago. The statements after that date were from my own accounts, showing the exact same amounts for the mortgage and utilities being drawn month after month. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and deeply, profoundly sad. As I organized it all into a single, damning portfolio, I felt a strange detachment. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about truth. It was about drawing a line in the sand of my own life, a line they would no longer be allowed to cross. That evening, I called them into the living room. They came reluctantly, wearing expressions of beleaguered patience, as if I were a difficult child demanding their attention. Celine sat on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through her phone. My mother took her favorite armchair, her posture stiff. "What is it, Alara?" my mother asked. "If this is about the incident last night, I think it's best we all just move on." I placed the thick portfolio on the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. Celine glanced up from her phone, annoyed. "What's that?" "More of your boring work." "In a way," I said calmly. "This is a record of my work for this family for the past 5 years." I opened the portfolio. I started with the house. I laid out the mortgage statements next to my bank records, highlighting the automatic payments. I showed them the property tax bills, paid by me. The utility bills, all in my name, all paid from my account. My mother's face, at first dismissive, began to tighten. She leaned forward, peering at the documents. I don't understand." "Dad's money ran out 3 years ago, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I didn't want to worry you, so I took over. I've been paying for everything since then. The house, the food, the repairs. Everything." Next, I turned to Celine. I laid out the university invoices, the payment confirmations. "Your entire education, Celine. Over $60,000 so far. I paid for it." I added the car payment book to the pile. "Your car, too." Celine's face had gone pale. She snatched one of the tuition statements, her eyes scanning the payment details at the bottom. The bravado drained out of her, leaving behind a raw, stunned disbelief. "No," she whispered. "No. You're lying." "The proof is right here," I said, gesturing to the sea of paper. "Every receipt, every statement. You can look for yourself." I then slid a single, final piece of paper across the table. It was a carefully compiled list of the items she had burned, with estimated values from the original receipts I had also kept. The total at the bottom was just over $32,000. "You accused me of being selfish for not giving you $8,500, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "You then destroyed over $30,000 of my property. Property I bought with my own money, money I earned while also paying for your entire life. You didn't just burn my clothes, Celine. You burned the very resources that were keeping you afloat." A thick, terrible silence filled the room. My mother stared at the papers, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The carefully constructed reality of her life was dissolving before her eyes. Celine was frozen, her face a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. The golden world she inhabited had been built on a lie she had never thought to question, and its architect was the sister she held in such contempt. I stood up. The weight that had lived on my shoulders for years felt like it had finally lifted. "I'm moving out," I announced to the quiet room. "I have already put a deposit down on an apartment. As of today, I will no longer be contributing to this household. The mortgage is due on the 1st. So are the utilities. You will have to figure it out for yourselves." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them with the wreckage of their delusions spread out on the coffee table. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. But Celine, cornered and terrified, was not going to let me go that easily. Her next move would be one of pure desperation, an attempt to drag me down into the ruins with her. My new apartment was small, a second-floor walk-up in a less fashionable part of Port Blossom, but to me, it was a palace. It had high ceilings, a window that looked out onto an old brick building, and it was gloriously, peacefully quiet. The first few days were a blur of unpacking the few belongings I had left and buying cheap, functional furniture. For the first time in my adult life, my paycheck was entirely my own. The feeling was intoxicating. I could breathe. I had been in the apartment for just over a week when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello, is this Alara Vance?" a man's serious voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Miss Vance, this is Detective Miller with the Port Blossom Police Department. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." My blood ran cold. "The police? What is this about?" "Your sister, Celine Vance, filed a report this morning," the detective said, his tone professional and unreadable. "She's alleging that you've been embezzling funds from a family estate account for the past several years." I sank down onto a cardboard box, the phone pressed hard against my ear. I should have been shocked, but I wasn't. I was just tired. This was her move. Cornered by the truth, she had decided to twist it into a weapon. Instead of facing her own responsibility, she was trying to make me a criminal. "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I can be there in an hour. And officer? I'll be bringing my own documentation." When I hung up, a cold fury, different from any I'd felt before, settled over me. This was no longer a family drama. This was a line she had crossed from which there was no coming back. I went to the closet where I'd stored the file box. I hadn't brought the binders, but I had brought the box itself, containing the most critical documents. I made copies of everything at a nearby print shop, the final statement from the estate account showing a zero balance, my own bank statements showing the subsequent mortgage payments, Celine's tuition receipts paid from my account, the car loan agreement. I packed it all neatly into a briefcase. At the police station, I was led into a small, sterile interview room. Detective Miller was a weary-looking man in his 50s, with kind eyes that didn't miss a thing. He listened patiently as I laid out my story, my voice never wavering. Then I opened the briefcase and laid out the copies on the table, just as I had on the coffee table at home. "This is the final statement of the trust my father left," I explained, pointing to the paper. "As you can see, it was depleted on this date. These are my bank statements. You can see the mortgage payments for the family home, for the same amount, beginning to be withdrawn from my personal account the very next month. And here are the tuition payments to her university." He spent the next hour poring over the documents, occasionally looking up at me, his expression shifting from professional skepticism to something else. Understanding. Pity. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed, running a hand over his face. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice softer now. "Based on this evidence, it is abundantly clear that you have not been embezzling anything. In fact, it appears you've been the sole financial support for your mother and sister for quite some time." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. To have a stranger validate the truth I had lived with in silence for so long was a powerful, painful relief. "Your sister, on the other hand," he continued, his tone hardening again, "has filed a false police report. That is a criminal offense. A serious one. He tapped a finger on the pile of papers. Given the financial motive here, it seems she's trying to intimidate you into continuing to support her. This could also be viewed as attempted extortion. He looked at me directly. We will be launching an investigation into her. I'm going to need to keep these copies, and I may need the originals. Are you willing to press charges for the destruction of your property as well? I thought of the smoldering pile in my garden, of my mother's dismissive words. It's just clothes. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong. Yes, I am. I walked out of the police station into the bright afternoon sun. The air had never felt so fresh, the sky so blue. Celine had meant to bury me, but she had only succeeded in handing me a shovel. And now, the hole she had been digging for me was one she was about to fall into herself. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of peaceful solitude and distant turmoil. I focused on my new life. I painted my apartment walls a soft, calming gray. I bought a thriving fiddle-leaf fig tree and placed it by the window. I started a small side project, creating and selling high-quality botanical prints online, inspired by the detailed floral sketches I did for my landscape work. It was a small joy, a thing that was entirely for me. Meanwhile, the consequences of Celine's actions began to ripple outward. She was formally charged with filing a false police report and misdemeanor destruction of property. Our mother, I heard through a concerned aunt who called me, was beside herself, trying to scrape together money for a lawyer. The university, alerted to the financial situation and the unpaid balance for the current semester, suspended Celine's enrollment. The court date arrived on a crisp autumn day. I went not out of a desire to see my sister punished, but because my lawyer said my testimony was crucial. I saw them across the courtroom. My mother looked aged, her face etched with worry. Celine was a shadow of her former self. Her usual vibrant confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, terrified anger. She wouldn't look at me. My lawyer presented the case with quiet, methodical precision. He laid out the financial evidence, the police report, and photographs of the burned remnants of my clothing, along with the itemized list of their value. When I took the stand, I simply told the truth, my voice calm and steady. I spoke of the years of support, the argument over the retreat, and the discovery in the backyard. I did not embellish or editorialize. I just stated the facts. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, listened intently. When it was Celine's turn, her lawyer attempted to paint her as a distraught young artist, overwhelmed and confused. But under cross-examination, her story crumbled. She grew defensive and hostile, and the judge's patience visibly thinned. The verdict was swift. "Miss Vance," the judge said, looking down at Celine from the bench, her voice ringing with authority. "Your actions display a shocking level of entitlement and malice. You took advantage of your sister's generosity for years, and when she finally established a boundary, you retaliated with an act of childish and destructive cruelty. Then, you compounded your offense by attempting to use the law to intimidate and frame her. This court does not take kindly to such behavior." Celine was found guilty on both counts. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, 2 years of probation, and was ordered to pay me full restitution for the property she destroyed, $32,450. A judgment was placed against her, a legal debt that would follow her until it was paid. Celine let out a choked sob. My mother sat frozen in her seat, her face ashen. I felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, aching sadness for the family we could have been. Justice had been served, but there was no victory in it. It was simply the sad, logical conclusion to a story they had written themselves. Without my income, the house of cards they lived in collapsed. The foreclosure notice arrived on the heavy oak door of my father's house. The electricity was shut off. Celine, with a criminal record and no degree, found that the only jobs available to her were in retail and food service, humbling work for which she had nothing but contempt. Her fashionable friends, who had orbited her charm and the lifestyle I had unknowingly funded, evaporated like morning mist. My aunt called me once, her voice hushed. "Alara, they're losing the house. Your mother, she sold her wedding ring to pay the lawyer. Celine had to sell her car to make the first restitution payment to you. Can't you help them?" "I can't, Aunt Carol," I said softly, but my voice was firm. "I can't set myself on fire to keep them warm anymore." I hung up the phone and looked around my small, peaceful apartment, at my thriving plant, and my budding business. I had lost a family, it was true. But I was finally, after so long, building a home. A year can change everything. It can be a season of quiet growth, like a forest floor after a fire, where new life pushes up through the ash. My online print shop, Port Blossom Botanicals, flourished in a way I never anticipated. What started as a hobby became a genuine business. My intricate, detailed drawings of local flora, the resilient lilacs, the windswept coastal pines, the delicate sea thrift, resonated with people. Orders came in from all over the country. Within 6 months, I was making enough to quit my job at the design firm and focus on my own art, a beautiful irony that was not lost on me. I moved out of the small walk-up and into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony that overlooked the harbor. I could sit out there in the evenings, wrapped in a blanket, and watch the lights of the boats twinkle on the water. My life was filled with peace, with the friendship of other local artists I'd met, and with the simple, profound joy of creating something that was wholly my own. The restitution payments from Celine arrived in my bank account each month, a small, sterile transfer of funds that felt less like revenge and more like the closing of a ledger. I heard through the family grapevine that my mother and Celine had lost the house. They were renting a small, cramped apartment on the industrial side of town. My mother had taken a job as a receptionist. Celine was working as a waitress, the tips she earned going directly toward her court-ordered debt to me. Their world had shrunk, brought down to the size of their own efforts. One rainy Tuesday in November, a package arrived for me. It was a small, square box with no return address, just my name and address written in my mother's familiar, elegant script. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let any part of their world breach the peace of mine. But curiosity, a gentler, more forgiving version of it, won out. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, framed pressed flower. It was a single sprig of lilac, the color faded, but the form still perfect. Tucked behind it was a letter. I unfolded the single sheet of paper, my hands steady. "Alara," it began. "There is no easy way to write this. For a long time, I was angry with you. I thought you had abandoned us, that you had been cruel. It has taken me a long year of hardship to see the truth. The cruelty was ours. I see that now. I failed you as a mother." I saw Celine's light, and I was so dazzled by it, I never noticed I was asking you to stand in the shadows to make it seem brighter. I took your strength, your quiet confidence, for granted. I am so sorry for the pain we caused you, for the things we took, and for the things we broke that can never be replaced. I am sorry for not protecting you. We are not asking for your help. We are not asking for your forgiveness, because I don't believe we have earned it. I am just writing to say that I see you now, Alara. I see all that you did, and I hope you are happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world. With love, Mom. Tears streamed down my face as I read it. They were not tears of pain or rage, but of release. It was not a magic wand that fixed everything, but it was an acknowledgement. It was the truth, finally spoken. I placed the pressed lilac on my desk, next to a fresh sketch. For a long time, I thought that my story was about my sister turning into my enemy. But I see now that it wasn't. The real enemy was the silence, the enabling, the unspoken expectations that allowed our family to become so unbalanced. My enemy was the role I had been playing for far too long. I don't know what the future holds for my mother and Celine. Perhaps, in time, we will find a new way to be a family, one built on the solid ground of truth and respect rather than the shifting sands of obligation. Or perhaps we won't. But as I sat there in my quiet, sunlit studio, with the sound of the rain against the window and the scent of ink and paper in the air, I knew my own future was secure. I had lost a house, but I had built a life. I had learned to draw my own boundaries as carefully as I drew the lines of a garden, and in doing so, I had finally, truly, learned to bloom.